There is new information to report tonight about one of the country's most aggressive opponents of health reform, the grassroots-ish group Americans for Prosperity, whose president Tim Phillips we hosted on this show last night. Americans for Prosperity has been barnstorming through southern states over the past few days as part of its Hands Off My Healthcare bus tour. I interviewed Mr. Phillips last night in the hopes of trying to clarify who he is and who's funding him to do campaigns like this, to clarify who this group actually represents when they're out in the country saying they're grassroots just folks against health reform. My interview with Mr. Phillips has received a lot of attention today, particularly for the way that it ended. But one thing that happened in the heated closing of our interview has been factually clarified today, and I think it's important to make sure we get this on the air. First, here's what happened last night.
I just want to know who you are, and I want America to know who you are. And I have to tell you, because we're making this about you and me, is that I personally think that you and the folks who do what you do are a parasite who gets fat on Americans' fears. And I hope that America.
That's very hurtful and disappointing.
I know this sounds hurtful. That's why I paused before I said it, because I wanted to make sure that I wanted to say it.
And you're disparaging a lot of Americans who are out there fighting the good fight, Rachel.
No, it's different.
Sure you are.
It's different because you're being paid to do it. And what you're doing.
And what are you being paid to do? To attack guys like me and David Koch and Art
When you signed on, you took money to say some really disgusting things in the past, like you did about those Chinese workers in the Mariana Islands, and we know who paid you to do it then. It was guys like Ralph Reed, who should have gone to prison, and guys like Jack Abramoff, who did go to prison. Now you're pushing stuff that is as disgusting, and the only difference is that we don't know this time.
Standing up for the healthcare freedoms of Americans is disgusting.
Well, no, but having speakers at your event saying that Obamacare is like Pol Pot and the Holocaust.
I haven't said that.
Right, but your speakers have, and you're organizing.
A speaker who was at an event that was co-sponsored by us. We did not have control of the podium. Again, if you want to pick out one of 600 rallies, I've asked you to come before. Come with us on the road and see these people.
I don't want to help promote you, Tim. I don't. I think what you're doing is you're getting fat, literally financially fat on Americans' fears. And
what are you getting fat financially to do, Rachel? You're doing it to
do a news show, and I'm trying to tell people who you are.
Come on, attacking us, please.
And what I hope is that people stop falling for your stick and stop being so afraid, and that your industry that takes money to do this stuff and scare people and make money off it as a, I think, Republican and corporate funded thing, I hope that your industry proverbially starves because we stop being so afraid. So I feel like I got to say that to your face because it's what's burning under the surface while I'm asking you these questions.
I can tell you're pretty upset tonight.
I'm mad about what you do. I think you're really bad for the country.
Yeah, well, you have every right to think that.
Okay, so in the midst of all of that, something was mentioned very quickly there that is important and we need to clarify. You heard Tim Phillips there try to sort of muddy the waters about something that his group, Americans for Prosperity, has frankly been attacking me and this show's reporting about since we first had him on the program. Something that happened in Pueblo, Colorado this summer. A speaker at one of these Americans for Prosperity anti-health reform rallies compared Democrats' health reform plans to Pol Pot and Hitler and the final solution. We've played this tape before of this speaker on this show, and Americans for Prosperity has not been happy about it.
If this new Obamacare program comes to fruition, when you reach 65 and every 5 years thereafter, you're going to have a counseling session with some federal airhead. Part of this process is called end-of-life counseling, and part of the end-of-life counseling can be an end-of-life order. What does that mean? End-of-life. Another word for that is death. Order. What's another word for that? A sentence. Now, you folks review with me a little bit. As I recall, Stalin in the 1920s issued about 20 million end-of-life orders for his fellow Russians. Pol Pot did it during the Vietnam War. He issued about 2 million end-of-life orders. Adolf Hitler issued 6 million end-of-life orders. He called his program the final solution. I kind of wonder what we're going to call ours.
The last time we played that tape on this show, Americans for Prosperity went after me in this show online. AFP's policy director, Phil Kerpen, asserted that the entire video was a fraud. He said it was a video created by the union SEIU and that what it showed was definitively not an Americans for Prosperity event. See, was not an AFP event. Mr. Kerpen is wrong. And their attacks on me for airing that footage are also wrong. Let me make this clear once and for all. No matter how they try to muddy the waters, no matter how they try to attack me for saying it, no matter how uncomfortable it makes them about their own tactics and what they're trying to do to scare Americans about health reform, the Pol Pot, Hitler, final solution, health reform is really a secret genocide dude, was speaking at an Americans for Prosperity event. Do you want proof? Well, here's the bloody red handprint bus rolling up to that event in Pueblo, Colorado that day. Here's another speaker being introduced at that same event.
There's a fellow co-worker of mine and a man who has been working hard on this issue. Jeff Crank, come on up here.
Jeff Crank, come on up here. Who's Jeff Crank? He's the Colorado State Director for Americans for Prosperity. Here was Jeff Crank rallying the crowd at that event.
We have traveled in that bus today. We started off in Fort Collins this morning. We had 400 people there who signed our petition. We went to Greeley. We had 350 in Greeley. And right now here in Pueblo, we're at 151 people who have signed the petition.
We traveled in that bus to Fort Collins, to Greeley, and now we're here in Pueblo. You want to see the official calendar of events from that day from the Americans for Prosperity website? Oh, look, Fort Collins, Greeley, Pueblo. And who was one of the speakers after Mr. Crank at that event? Yeah, it was Mr. Pol Pot, Hitler, final solution dude. And he wasn't just some guy who grabbed the mic during the event. He was an official speaker at the event. Jeff Crank, Americans for Prosperity's Colorado director, was reportedly standing in the wings as Mr. Pol Pot was waxing poetic about how health reform is just like the Holocaust. We have to give our thanks to Rafael Rivera, who's the videographer who shot that event, for sending along that footage, clarifying that no matter how much they want to disown it, this is what Americans for Prosperity is doing around the country, to scare Americans about health reform. And Americans for Prosperity, Mr. Phillips is right. They have every right to do what they're doing. And I and every other American has every right to ask who they are representing when they do these things. They're not disclosing their funders. They're trying to scare Americans about health reform. They are disavowing their own tactics when they get called out on them. And the First Amendment is paramount. It's first. You have every right to say whatever claptrap you want to say in this country and to try to exploit and scare Americans for any cause you think you can wring a profit out of. But we also have every right to report on what you're doing, and we will, no matter how much you try to get us not to.